Racist cop broke a cane like it meant nothing, not knowing it belonged to Big Shaq's mother. Thought it was just another silent Sunday in the South. Didn't expect the story to ripple from a quiet park bench to the nation's heartbeat. By the time the truth caught up, cameras were rolling, and the name behind the cane was already changing the game. Some legacies don't shout, they show up. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was the kind of southern heat that stuck to your skin like syrup. Not aggressive, not cruel, just there, thick and full, like time had slowed to a syrupy crawl. In the quiet heart of Brookhaven, Georgia, where oaks arched over sidewalks like cathedral beams, and church bells carried further than gossip, a woman walked alone. The air shimmered around her like reverence. Her pace was measured, careful, but not weak. Each step was its own sermon. Lucille O'Neal wore her Sunday best. Cream-colored blouse, soft lavender slacks, a straw hat curved just right. Her presence didn't call for attention. It commanded it. She moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had seen too much and survived all of it. And in her right hand she held a cane, not just wood, but a polished golden oak, with a brass lion's head curled into the grip. It gleamed in the sun like it carried history. It wasn't just to support her, it belonged to her story. Few knew that story here. Not in this pocket of town. Not anymore. The old-timers had moved on, and the new ones only saw an elderly black woman walking alone. They didn't see the sacrifices. They didn't know the lineage that Cain had followed, passed to her from her father, who once stood in a picket line in Alabama, who carved it himself during nights too dangerous to sleep through. The lion wasn't for vanity. It was a symbol, one that Lucille never had to explain. She passed the diner, Carol's Eats, where the blinds twitched at her silhouette. She didn't look in. She didn't need to. She passed the corner barbershop, the one with new management and unfamiliar music pulsing too loud for this kind of heat. The sidewalk was cracked but familiar under her loafers. She was headed to the park. She always was on Sundays. There was a bench beneath the oaks with her name written in invisible ink. Lucille's breath was steady, though her knees ached. The cane absorbed her pain like it had for years. With every step she remembered what it meant to be underestimated, what it meant to be invisible in a world that used to shout her down, and now pretended not to see her at all. But she'd learned that silence was a kind of power too. You just had to know how to hold it. As she turned the corner onto Elmhurst Avenue, the sun carved shadows behind her. Her reflection moved in store windows like a soft echo of herself. No one offered help. No one asked if she was okay. But she didn't need their pity. She wasn't a symbol for them to pity. There was a car that slowed behind her. She didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago not to show that kind of fear, not even when she felt it. The car rolled past, just a delivery guy on his phone. She exhaled, not relief, just release. Lucille's thoughts drifted to her son. Not because she was worried about him, never that, but because she knew he was overdue for a visit. She'd raised him with her bare hands, and nothing else. She'd taught him that bigness didn't just mean height or wealth or fame. It meant capacity. Capacity to forgive, to help, to hold your peace when the world tried to snatch it. He was a household name now. Shaquille. Shaq. Big Shaq. $1 million smile, and a heart twice as rich. But to her, he was just her boy, the one who used to cry at the sound of thunder, and slept with his head on her lap when the world was too much. The one who bought her that cane the year her hips gave out, not just because she needed it, but because he knew she wouldn't ask. The sidewalk narrowed near the entrance to Fairhill Park. She paused. The light was bouncing off the metal tip of the cane, like a beacon. A family passed her. Mother, father, 2 kids. The father didn't look at her. The mother did, briefly, with that same tight smile people offer to strangers they've already judged. The boy glanced at the cane, said nothing, kept walking. Lucille made her way through the gate into the park. The trees bowed over her like an old choir. Birds chirped in steady rhythm. She nodded to no one, as if greeting ancestors. The bench was there empty, waiting. She moved toward it, the lion head guiding her. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves as she sat down. She sighed not from fatigue, but from ritual. Her fingers rested on the lion's mane, tracing it like a memory. Across the field, children played tag. Their laughter didn't reach her. Not fully. She was somewhere else, in another time, A time when parks like this weren't so open, when benches came with rules. She remembered the first time her son picked her up in his brand new Escalade, too big for the driveway, too loud for the neighborhood. He'd looked down at her like she was the only royalty he'd ever known. Told her, "This is your world now, Mama." All of it, and she'd smiled because he believed it. Because somehow, despite it all, he still believed in justice. The clouds shifted slightly. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and gasoline. A breeze lifted the hem of her slacks, and then footsteps, not fast, not heavy, but deliberate. Lucille didn't look, not yet. Her hand tightened slightly around the cane. She'd learned that when trouble approached, you didn't blink. You rooted. The footsteps stopped behind her. There was no voice, just presence. And in that long breath of silence, before a word was spoken, before anything had begun to truly unfold, the air itself seemed to whisper, "This will not be an ordinary Sunday." And it wouldn't be. But for now, Lucille just sat, holding history in her hand, wrapped in heat, beneath the oaks, on a quiet street that was about to remember who she really was. The cane glimmered once more in the sunlight. Then everything changed. Officer Rhett Calloway had a face built for authority, square jaw, neatly parted hair, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He drove his cruiser like he owned the streets, even though he'd only transferred to Brookhaven 4 months ago. To him, it wasn't about serving, it was about managing, keeping things in order, making sure people remembered who made the rules. And when those people didn't look like him, or didn't fit his version of community, the badge on his chest seemed to get heavier. Rhett had grown up 2 counties over, in a town where nodding at your neighbors was more about expectation than kindness. He'd learned early that posture was everything. You stand taller than the person you're speaking to. You speak just loud enough to cut through doubt, and if you're wearing a badge, you make damn sure they see it before they hear you. That Sunday afternoon, the sun pouring down in hazy waves, Rhett rolled past Elmhurst Avenue for the 3rd time. His shift had been quiet. Too quiet. He didn't like quiet. Quiet made people forget someone was watching. Then he saw her, Lucille O'Neal, moving at her own pace near the curb by Fairhill Park. He didn't know her name, didn't recognize the legacy wrapped in her walk. All he saw was an old black woman drifting too slow along a sidewalk that he decided wasn't hers to drift on. He tapped his brake, shifted the cruiser into idle, watched her for a moment. No crime, no danger, but something about her presence. It unsettled him. Not in a way he could name, but in the way that prejudice always does, silently, from a distance, masked in protocol, and laced with the conviction that he was just doing his job. Lucille hadn't seen him yet. She was almost at the corner now. Just a few feet from the park gate, the cane shimmered under her weight, the lion's head catching the sun like a silent guardian. Rhett stepped out of his car. His boots hit the pavement with an intentional thud. "Ma'am," he said, voice neutral, rehearsed. Lucille stopped, not startled, just still. She turned halfway, not fully. She'd seen that posture before. She knew what it meant when someone called you ma'am, but didn't mean respect. "Yes, officer," she said, her voice smooth as stone. He walked toward her with the rhythm of someone making a point. "You live around here?" She blinked, not confused, just disappointed. "For decades." Rhett nodded slowly, like he didn't believe her, like he wasn't even listening to the answer. His eyes dropped to the cane, then rose back to her face. "We've had reports of trespassing in the neighborhood," he said. "Some residents are concerned." Lucille didn't move. "Concerned about what?" "Loitering," he replied. "Suspicious activity." Her gaze didn't flinch. She stood straighter. "You mean walking?" Rhett took a step closer. There were no cameras yet. No witnesses. Just the 2 of them under the arching oaks, the air stretched thin with tension. "You've got ID on you?" he asked. Lucille's hand rested tighter on the cane. "I don't need ID to walk to the park where I've sat for 30 years. Rhett's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to resistance in this tone. Steady, calm, unshaken. It wasn't rage. It was dignity. And dignity to men like Rhett always read like defiance. "Don't get difficult," he said, stepping even closer. Lucille still didn't move. "I'm standing on a sidewalk, officer." That's when the shift happened. Subtle but immediate. Rhett's hand twitched, not toward his belt, not toward a weapon, but toward the cane. "What's this?" he said, gesturing to the lion's head. "It's mine," Lucille replied. He reached for it anyway. Not with full force, not yanking it from her, but with the kind of casual disrespect that tried to pass itself off as just checking. His fingers wrapped around the lion's mane. "Let go of that," she said, her voice firm now. But he didn't. He stared at the carving like it offended him, like it had no place being carried through his district. His grip tightened. Her hand stayed firm. A breath passed between them, long, sharp, electric. And then, in one small motion that felt bigger than thunder, Rhett twisted. There was a crack, not loud, not dramatic, but gutting. The cane snapped just below the brass head, the wood splintering in two, like a limb broken clean. Lucille gasped, not from pain, but from grief. The cane fell to the sidewalk, both pieces landing in a silence so thick even the wind seemed to pause. Rhett froze, almost surprised by himself. But there was no apology in his eyes, just a flash of regret that someone might have seen it. Lucille didn't speak. She didn't scream. She didn't fall. She just stared at the broken cane lying at her feet. The lion head now separate from its body. The legacy snapped in two. For a long, breathless second, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Lucille bent down. Not all the way, just enough to collect the top half of the cane. Her fingers wrapped around the lion's head, now dulled by dust. She straightened her back with effort, but without help. "Are you proud of that?" she asked. Not angry, not trembling, just tired. Rhett didn't answer. He turned, walked back to his cruiser, and pulled away like nothing had happened. But something had. Something irreversible. Something that wouldn't stay silent for long. A boy on a bike, across the street, had seen the whole thing. He pulled out his phone, already texting, and Lucille, still standing in the heat, holding the broken pieces of her past, turned toward the park without another word. The lion head glinted one last time in the sun before slipping into shadow. The cane didn't shatter with drama. It didn't splinter into 1,000 pieces or cause a scream to echo through the neighborhood. It broke the way things do when they've carried too much weight for too long, quietly, irreversibly, and yet somehow that soft crack echoed louder than any siren that afternoon. It crawled along the sidewalk like smoke. It seeped into the concrete, wrapped itself around tree trunks, slithered through cell signals, and found its way into the lungs of those who had seen it unfold. Lucille stood still, one hand wrapped around the lion's head, the other hanging by her side, like it no longer had a purpose. Her breath was steady, but her silence was crushing. She hadn't cried. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't even looked back as the officer drove away. And in that restraint, in that steel-wrapped stillness, was a message that no bullhorn could carry. "I've survived worse than this, and I am still here." A boy across the street had caught it all. His name was Troy, maybe 15, with beat-up sneakers and a cracked phone screen that couldn't hold a charge past noon. But it held up just long enough to capture the exact moment the cane was twisted. The exact second Lucille looked down at the broken wood, as if someone had snapped a piece of her father's memory right in front of her. Troy hadn't planned on filming it. He was just riding his bike when he heard the voice. He saw the stance. He felt the tension in the air the way animals sense storms, and he hit record without fully understanding why. Within minutes, the video was already posted. No hashtags, no commentary, just the raw footage and a caption, "That ain't right." The park wasn't packed that day, but enough people lingered. A jogger slowed. A couple walking their dog paused. The woman clutched her purse without knowing why. A mailman parked his truck on the edge of the curb and watched from a distance, frowning. The crowd formed not in chaos but in curiosity. They weren't yelling. They weren't reacting violently. They were feeling all at once the collective weight of what had just happened. Someone asked Lucille if she was okay. She didn't answer. She didn't nod. Her eyes were fixed on the path ahead, the bench still waiting under the oaks, the place she was always headed. She walked again, slower now, her balance less steady, the broken cane gripped in both hands like a sacred object. And that's when the whispers began. "Did you see that?" She didn't even fight him. She didn't need to. He broke it like it was trash. "She's somebody's mother, man. Who does that?" That was her walking cane, her actual support. "You don't treat people like that, I don't care what badge you got," one man muttered. "Should have been a lawsuit on the spot." A woman next to him replied, "She ain't about lawsuits. She's about legacy." Someone asked her name. No one knew. Not yet. But Troy, still standing at the edge of the sidewalk, still holding his phone like it might start shaking in his hand, was staring at the video frame by frame. Something about the woman, The way she stood. The carved lion. The quiet dignity. It all stirred a memory. He turned to his cousin, who had just rolled up on a skateboard. Yo, isn't that Shaq's mom? His cousin squinted. Nah, no way. Troy zoomed in on the cane's head. I think it is. He opened his messages and typed fast, fingers moving faster than thought. The message was simple. Somebody tell Shaq. It didn't go viral right away. It didn't blow up the internet in 30 seconds. But it didn't have to. It only had to reach the right circle. And that message was the match that hit dry kindling. It passed from hand to hand, inbox to inbox, like something sacred that couldn't be dropped. Meanwhile, Lucille reached the bench. She sat slowly, exhaling through her nose, resting the lion's head beside her on the wood, like it still carried breath. She adjusted her hat, crossed her ankles, looked out across the park with the same expressionless gaze she wore when Shaquille brought home his first trophy. She wasn't thinking about the video. She wasn't thinking about the whispers, or the crowd. She was remembering a time when someone tried to break her before and failed. Across the way, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mama, what happened to that lady's stick? The mother pulled her closer. That's not a stick, baby. That's a story. Phones were still raised. People filming, but quietly, respectfully now. Something about Lucille's posture had changed the atmosphere. No one dared interrupt her, but no one could look away either. The broken cane lay on her lap, both ends of it exposed like open wounds, and yet the lion's head gleamed. Not dulled by damage, but sharpened by it, as if saying, you can break the body, but not the symbol. There were no sirens, no news trucks yet, just a pressure in the air, like a storm forming far off the coast, still invisible, but undeniable. Rhett Calloway hadn't looked back. He drove off to the edge of town, rolled down his window, and lit a cigarette like nothing had happened. He was thinking of lunch, but the town was thinking of her. And somewhere, miles away, a phone buzzed on a granite kitchen counter. The message lit up the screen. Somebody tell Shaq. It wouldn't take long. The story had already begun, and this time it wasn't going to fade. Not with witnesses, not with footage, not with a lion watching. Shaquille O'Neal had always understood that silence wasn't absence. It was presence. That the most powerful moments in life were rarely the loudest. And if there was one person who taught him that, it was his mother, Lucille O'Neal, a woman whose strength wasn't wrapped in words or noise, but in restraint, the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to raise a giant. That Sunday, as the video continued to make its way across screens and servers, across inboxes and timelines, Shaq was already closer than anyone knew. He wasn't across the country. He wasn't unreachable in some high-rise or lost in endorsements. He was home, quietly, intentionally, a low-key visit, unannounced, to surprise his mother with brunch and bring her a new pair of orthopedic slippers he'd picked out himself. He wanted to take her to her favorite place, Carol's Eats, order sweet tea, fried green tomatoes, and sit like they used to when money was a fantasy and peace was a currency she earned with every sunrise. But Lucille hadn't been home. He knocked twice. Waited. Called. No answer. A neighbor across the street waved and said she'd seen her walking toward the park. And so Shaq waited in her living room, larger than life in that little space. The couch was smaller now, the ceilings lower. Everything shrunk around his size, except for the memories. Those still fit. The house smelled like lemon oil and old books. On the mantel sat a photo of his high school graduation, the frame a little crooked. Shaq had one arm around Lucille, the other in a sling from a street ball injury. She was smiling like she'd already seen his future. And maybe she had. He turned on the TV, just to pass the time, flipped through channels, then his phone buzzed. One notification. No message, just a video link. Caption, "Is this your mom?" He didn't even have to press play. The still image told him everything. Lucille's profile, her cane, that cane, the lion's head, the park bench, the officer's shadow. He sat down slowly, knees buckling slightly like gravity had shifted. He hit play. The sound wasn't loud. There wasn't shouting. There wasn't chaos. But the moment the cane broke, when it snapped like a dry branch, and his mother just stood there, unflinching, regal in pain, something twisted inside him. But he didn't rage. He didn't stand up shouting or slam his fist. Instead, he closed his eyes and let the memory of her voice wash over him. Son, strength isn't what you show in anger. It's what you hold back in it. Those words had been planted in him, like gospel. He remembered the first time he learned what that meant. He was 12, walking home with Lucille from a corner store in the north side of Newark, when a man spat near her feet and called her something no child should ever hear. Shaq had tensed, ready to throw fists that hadn't yet grown into the size they would one day be. But Lucille simply looked at the man, said nothing, and kept walking. Later, Shaq had exploded. "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you cuss him out?" Lucille had cupped his face in her hands and said, "Because I wasn't raised by wolves, and neither will you be." Years later, that lesson echoed in arenas filled with screaming fans. When trash talk came for his ego, he answered with dunks, not fists. When critics came for his worth, he smiled wider. Every interview, every speech, every endorsement, he moved with her grace, grafted into his spine. Back in the present, Shaq stood up, the video still running in his palm, frozen now on the image of his mother sitting alone on that bench, holding broken pieces of a legacy she never deserved to see shattered. His heart didn't race, his chest didn't heave, but something in him settled, the kind of stillness that comes before thunder. He stepped out the door, ducking slightly through the frame, and headed toward Fairhill Park. Not in a sprint, not in a rush, but in stride. With every step, he remembered how she raised him through scarcity and struggle, how dinner sometimes came in halves, how she worked nights so he could have mornings, how she once walked through 3 blocks of broken glass barefoot when their old car died, just to get his asthma medicine. She never asked for praise. She only ever asked one thing: don't let the world make you forget who you are. The park came into view. From the distance he saw her. Lucille, sitting upright, hands resting gently on the cane, or what was left of it. The lion's head beside her. A crowd formed like a tide behind her, silent but watching. They didn't cheer when they saw Shaq. They didn't rush to take pictures. It was as if his presence had stepped into their silence like it belonged there. A teenager with a camera lowered it slowly. A man removed his cap. A child whispered to his father, "Is that him?" And the father said nothing, just nodded. But Shaq didn't approach right away. He stood on the path for a while, feet planted, eyes on his mother. She hadn't noticed him yet. Or maybe she had and didn't need to turn. They had a language that didn't need translation. He thought of the first time she let him walk to school alone, the way she waved from the porch pretending not to worry. He thought of the first NBA check he brought home, and how she made him put it in a savings account before he touched a dime. He thought of the way she called him baby, even now, even when the world called him legend. And in that moment, standing beneath the same trees where her dignity had been tested hours earlier, he wasn't Shaq the icon, the millionaire, the Hall of Famer. He was Lucille's son, a man made in the image of a woman who knew when to speak and when to let silence roar. He took one step forward, then another. The arena was quiet, but not empty, and something in the air whispered back to him, "Now it begins." The house was still, its silence draped like linen over furniture that hadn't been disturbed in days. The TV sat untouched, the mail lay unopened on the side table, and the lemon-scented candles Lucille always kept near the windows had burned themselves into memory weeks ago. Shaquille stood in the middle of the living room, too big for the space but fitting in a way that only blood and history could explain. His head nearly grazed the ceiling fan, his presence filling the air like a held breath. He had arrived quietly. No media alerts, no SUV entourage, no hotel suite bookings or social media breadcrumbs. Just a tall man with soft steps and a craving for his mother's cornbread. He had flown in the night before, taken the back road from the airport, and parked his car 2 blocks away like a secret returning to its origin. He hadn't told anyone, not even his assistant. It was supposed to be a surprise. A quiet Sunday visit, maybe a walk to the church, maybe a trip down memory lane with Lucille by his side, hand in hand, like when he was a boy. But the door was unlocked when he got there. Not ajar, just unlatched. A sign his mother was nearby, that she'd stepped out expecting to be right back. He called out once, twice. The silence answered. No signs of struggle, no chaos, just that calm, unsettling absence that makes a grown man feel 10 years old again. Shaq set down the flowers he'd picked up from the corner florist, daisies and white roses, her favorite. He wandered through the house, brushing his fingers along picture frames and faded wall plaques, pausing at the kitchen table where an unfinished crossword and half-drunk glass of orange juice sat, as if paused mid-thought. He glanced at the crossword. 6 letters means dignity in silence. His throat tightened. He didn't know the word, but he knew what it felt like. It was there, standing in that threshold between kitchen and hallway, that his phone vibrated. He didn't reach for it immediately. He almost didn't want to, but something in the stillness warned him. This silence isn't rest, it's warning. He pulled the phone from his pocket. A single message. No sender name. Just a link. No caption. No emojis. Just a video thumbnail of his mother and a man in uniform standing too close. He pressed play and watched. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched, jaw tightening with each second that passed. The scene unfolded slowly. The exchange, the tone, the tension. Lucille standing tall, the officer stepping in. The cane, his cane, the one he had custom made for her from a Florida artisan, gripped like it didn't matter. And then the break. The moment the cane snapped in two, something in Shaq's chest dropped. But still, he didn't scream, didn't pace. He pressed pause, rewound it, watched it again, slower this time. The expression on his mother's face, that slight twitch in her brow, that imperceptible moment when pain was met with refusal. No collapse, no surrender. He watched it a third time, not because he needed to, but because something in him demanded to absorb it. The way athletes watch tape, not just to see, but to understand. The officer's body language. The exact moment where power turned into cruelty. The empty space where apology should have lived. Shaq placed the phone on the table and sat down slowly. Not because his knees hurt, but because something heavier had settled inside him. He stared out the window, into the neighborhood he'd once known as home, watching children ride bikes and neighbors water their lawns, like nothing had shifted beneath their feet. But something had shifted. The world thought he would see this footage on the news. From a stage, from some penthouse or hotel suite. They didn't know he was already here, already in the house his mother left that morning, already sitting where she'd poured his cereal for years, already walking distance from that park. And that's when the shift in him happened. Not rage, not fury, but clarity. Like the moment before a tip-off when everything else fades and only the ball remains. Lucille didn't need a rescue. She wasn't the victim in this story. She was the warning. The reminder. But someone had forgotten who she was. And more dangerously, who she raised. Shaq stood. His body, slow but deliberate, unfolded like a monument, returning to its foundation. He looked down at the phone again. Screen now black. The echo of the video still humming in his mind. He didn't pocket it. He didn't need to. He walked to the hallway, opened the coat closet, pulled out his old hoodie, the one Lucille never threw out, and slipped it over his frame. No branding, no endorsements, just fabric and memory. He grabbed the keys off the hook. No security detail, no calls to PR. Just one man heading back to the one place where something wrong had taken place. Not to perform, not to protest, but to stand. The street outside felt smaller than he remembered. The pavement more cracked. The air thicker. People passed by, unaware that the storm they had all witnessed had already met its calm center. And that center was now in motion. Shaq walked, not fast, but with purpose. He didn't need a camera crew. He didn't need a mic. His name carried more weight than all of them combined. But today his presence would speak louder than his resume. The son had seen the footage, and he hadn't come to explain. He had come to remind. Rhett Calloway sat slouched behind his desk at the precinct, arms folded, chewing a toothpick like it might hold back the press of rising tension in his chest. He kept one boot up on the edge of the desk, posture loud and dismissive, like a man who refused to acknowledge the weight of what was coming. A thin slice of sunlight cut across the floor, but the air in the room was thick with unspoken warnings. His superior had told him earlier that morning, in clipped tones and carefully selected words, that the department had received multiple complaints about an interaction he'd had with a civilian. Public disturbance, they said. Possible misconduct. They were reviewing the footage. But Rhett didn't blink, didn't sweat. He'd been in tight corners before. It was always the same, someone misinterpreting a lawful stop. Getting emotional, claiming some kind of disrespect that was never actually said. He knew how to navigate backlash, ride it out, post something vague about safety, turn the story into noise. He opened his laptop, clicked through notifications, and saw the headline splashed across a local blog. Elderly woman's cane broken by officer during routine stop. Below it, a blurry image of Lucille mid-step. Cane shattered. Pride intact, he scoffed. Routine stop, he muttered to himself. She couldn't even walk straight. He clicked the video. Not to reflect, just to calculate. It wasn't the first time someone filmed him. Probably wouldn't be the last. The department would slap a warning on it. Maybe shuffle him to a different beat. Maybe not. But he knew the game. The rules always leaned his way. As the footage played, Rhett leaned in, watching himself on screen. He didn't see the severity. He didn't hear the tension in his voice. He only saw a woman challenging his authority, walking where she shouldn't have, questioning his tone, and a cane, just a piece of wood, nothing more. He rewound the video twice, scoffed, and scrolled the comments. Some were furious. How dare he? This woman's a hero. She didn't even fight back. But others, the ones he clung to, supported him. He was doing his job. These people love to play the victim. She probably faked the whole thing. He smirked, screenshot the video, posted it to a private forum of fellow officers with the caption, "When Grandma thinks she's above the law." The laughter rolled in fast. Emojis, thumbs up, inside jokes masked in acronyms. They fed his ego like oxygen in a closed room. But outside that echo chamber, the town was beginning to shift. Because while Rhett sat in a fluorescent haze, shielding himself with sarcasm, someone was moving through Brookhaven, unseen, unannounced, and heavier than any siren. Shaquille O'Neal walked past the diner without being noticed. His hoodie was pulled low, his shoulders hunched, just enough to avoid immediate recognition. But he didn't hide. He didn't need to. His presence was like a tide, the kind that changes landscapes before you realize it's even there. He passed two high school boys on the corner, one of whom looked up, eyes wide. "Yo, was that?" But Shaq was already gone, feet hitting pavement like footsteps in a drum roll. He didn't head to the station. He didn't call ahead. He just walked. Past murals of music legends, past the basketball court where he once practiced jump shots as a teen, past the shoe store where his first endorsement check had been spent on sneakers for every kid on the block. The town had changed. It had grown. But it hadn't evolved. Not where it counted. A woman stepped out of the florist shop and froze. She recognized him, but didn't speak. She just moved aside, letting him pass like a king, returning to a castle someone tried to forget he built. Back at the precinct, Rhett's laughter faded as the captain stepped in. A quiet knock, a glance, a tension that didn't need explaining. "I need to see you," the captain said flatly. Rhett stood. "Yeah, I figured." He stretched his arms as if the day was boring him, not threatening him. The captain didn't offer a smile, just nodded to the hallway. As Rhett followed, he glanced again at his phone. Another message had popped up, just 3 words. "You know who." He ignored it, walked behind the captain like a man walking toward inconvenience, not consequence. But beneath that arrogance was a small flickering doubt. Outside, Shaq was approaching the community center. The crowd around Lucille had grown quietly, respectfully. Some brought folding chairs, others brought flowers. No one brought signs. There was no protest here, no chance, just a stillness that stretched for blocks. And in the middle of it all sat Lucille, no longer alone, but never speaking. Her silence had become a sermon. When Shaq arrived, people noticed. But no one moved. They just parted, as if nature itself recognized the balance shifting. Rhett didn't know any of this. He didn't know that the footage had already reached newsrooms, that a retired city councilwoman had come out publicly to identify Lucille O'Neal as the mother of a man who's done more for this town than most mayors. He didn't know his silence was about to be tested the same way Lucille's had been. Because unlike her, he wouldn't be able to hold it. And unlike her, he didn't know that the man he mocked online, the grandma's son, wasn't just a basketball player. He was a movement, a legacy, a reckoning. And now, he was here, walking, watching, and waiting. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't belong to silence. It belongs to reverence. It moves slower than wind, heavier than noise. It's the kind of stillness that shifts a space without permission. And on that Sunday, as the heat thinned and shadows stretched like slow-moving memories, it was that stillness that rolled across Fairhill Park. The bench beneath the oaks had not moved. The broken cane had been picked up, but the crack in the air remained. It clung to the bark, settled on the sidewalk, haunted the spot like a scar that refused to fade. The grass knew, the dirt knew, the town felt it, even if no one said it out loud. Lucille had gone home. quietly, as she always did. She didn't want cameras. She didn't want apologies that arrived with disclaimers. She just wanted her son to sit where she couldn't anymore. Not until that bench had meaning again. Not until someone remembered. And so, without a schedule, without a single post or press release, Shaquille O'Neal appeared, as if summoned not by fame, but by gravity. He came alone. No car, no crew, just a shadow stretching across the path, until it stopped in front of the bench, her bench. He didn't look around. He didn't wave. He sat. His shoulders filled the space. His hands rested on his knees. His feet planted like roots. He said nothing, just looked straight ahead at the trees, the children in the distance, the town that had once whispered his name, with pride and now held its breath around him. For a moment it was just him and the wind. Then came the first passerby, a woman with a stroller, who slowed when she saw him. Her eyes flicked from his face to the bench, to the empty space beside him, and she froze. Her child reached out toward the grass, babbling. She nodded at Shaq, he nodded back, and she moved on, quietly, respectfully. Then came the boy with the skateboard. The same one who had whispered, "Somebody tell Shaq." He didn't expect to see him. Not here. Not this close. He stopped skating, picked up his board, approached with cautious steps, like he was walking into a sacred place. He didn't speak either, just stood across from the bench, eyes wide, heart thudding. The man he'd only seen in highlight reels and commercials now sat feet away, not larger than life, but somehow more like a mountain that decided to sit in the middle of a park and let the world figure out what it meant. More people followed. No one announced it. Word moved like smoke, uncontained, undeniable. They didn't rush, they didn't crowd, they gathered, slowly, purposefully. Families, grandparents, teenagers, barbers from up the street, a pastor who'd once baptized Shaq when he was 10, a retired bus driver who remembered driving Lucille to her second job every Thursday night. They came not for spectacle, but for alignment, for silence that meant something. And still Shaq didn't speak. His face was unreadable. Not angry, not soft, just anchored. He wasn't there for performance. He wasn't waiting for justice to arrive in a hashtag. He was waiting for remembrance, for the town to recognize not what had happened but who it happened to. Behind the bench, someone placed a small wooden sign in the ground. It wasn't official, just hand-painted words that read, "This seat held dignity. It now holds witness." An elderly man placed a folding chair 10 feet from the bench and sat in silence, hat clutched in both hands. He didn't know Shaq personally, but he knew Lucille. She'd once paid for his groceries when he forgot his wallet. He didn't speak either, just watched. A girl held up a sketch pad and started drawing. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. The moment demanded memory, not permission. In the far distance, a reporter showed up. She didn't dare approach, just stood at the edge of the park watching the scene unfold, not with the urgency of breaking news, but with the reverence of history in progress. Shaq finally moved. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. His eyes drifted to the spot on the sidewalk, where the cane had fallen. He didn't have to imagine it. He'd seen the video too many times. The arc of the fall, the split in the wood, the stillness in Lucille's face as the weight of someone else's ego cracked a piece of her identity. He took a deep breath, held it, let it out slowly, then reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out the lion's head. It had been polished, cleaned, but not restored. He didn't want it repaired. He wanted it remembered. He set it down on the bench beside him, resting it carefully, gently, like he was placing a crown on sacred ground. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Not noise, not applause, just awareness, like a collective exhale from people who'd been holding their breath for too long. A child asked, "Is he going to talk?" Her mother said, "He doesn't need to," because by now the message had arrived. This wasn't a protest. This wasn't a press event. This was a reckoning, wrapped in restraint. A reminder that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits, and lets the world rearrange itself around it. Back at the precinct, Rhett Calloway stared out his office window, watching a live stream on mute. He couldn't hear the silence, but he could feel it. Every comment on the screen was a nail, a weight, a mirror. He didn't scroll anymore. He just watched. No sirens blared that afternoon. No arrests were made. But a shift had occurred. One that no policy could deflect. one that no badge could override. Because the sun didn't come to threaten, he came to sit, and in doing so he made the town stand up. Rhett Calloway had always moved through the town like he owned its breath. His boots on the pavement were louder than his voice needed to be, and his badge did more talking than his mouth ever could. He was used to people looking away when he passed, not because they feared him, but because they didn't want the trouble he carried. That kind of silence always served him, until now. It began as a whisper he couldn't trace, a strange hush that had settled in the station, like the walls themselves had turned away from him. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no shouting, just distance, quiet and absolute. Files were passed without eye contact. Coffee was poured without a second glance. A junior officer who used to laugh too loud at Rhett's jokes now barely nodded at him. Then came the knock on his door. Not the captain, not a board of review, just the receptionist, eyes cautious. She didn't say much, just handed him a manila folder and said, "You'll want to read this." Inside was a single printout. An article, no formal stamp, just a local blog entry, printed with creases, the ink slightly smudged at the edges. He skimmed it. Lucille O'Neal, mother of NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal, mistreated in Brookhaven Park by Officer Calloway. Community, in silent response. He read the name twice, then 3 more times. Each syllable carved its way into him, like slow erosion. His brain tried to reject the connection, tried to place her back in that quiet frame, of civilian, of uncooperative, of non-compliant. But it no longer held. Lucille O'Neal. He stood, the folder limp in his hand. His chest felt tight, not from guilt, not yet, but from something worse, disorientation. He'd made her small in his mind so easily, dismissed her so quickly, but now, standing in the echo of her full name, something fragile inside him began to fray. He left the station without speaking, stepped out into sunlight that no longer welcomed him. The heat wasn't the same. It pressed differently. The town didn't look like it had yesterday. He walked, down Elmhurst, past the church, past the cafe where the owners barely nodded at him now, past a mural he had passed a dozen times without seeing, a 3-story painting of Shaquille O'Neal in mid-jump, arms spread like wings, eyes calm. The mural was titled Legacy of Quiet Power. It had been there since the town honored his Hall of Fame induction. Rhett had never stopped to read the plaque beneath it. He did now. Dedicated to Lucille O'Neal, whose strength raised giants. A breeze moved past him, cold despite the sun. He turned his head, and for the first time in months, he noticed people looking at him, not with hostility, not with protest signs or raised fists, but with something that cut deeper than anger ever could. Disappointment. An old man standing by a fruit stand narrowed his eyes as Rhett passed. A teenager at the corner paused his music and pulled out an earbud. A young woman holding a child shifted her stance, stepping slightly away, not in fear but in statement. And Rhett walked on. He turned onto Main Street, where the community center stood with its peeling white paint and memories of block parties. On its outer wall, photos were clipped along a corkboard. Summer camps, free toy drives, Thanksgiving meals. In 3 separate images, there was Shaq smiling, handing out bags, arm around elders, laughing with kids, not posing, not performing, showing up. 2 boys sat on the steps, bouncing a basketball between them. One looked up. "You the guy from the video?" Rhett didn't answer. The other boy pointed at a photo. "That's Shaq. He bought my brother a wheelchair ramp last year." He didn't say it with pride or awe. He said it like a statement of fact, like truth laid bare. Rhett kept moving. His shoes felt heavier now, not physically, but emotionally, like each step confirmed something he didn't want to admit. At the edge of the park he stopped. From a distance he could see the bench beneath the oaks. Shaq still sat there, silent, immovable. A force. Around him were people. Not loud, not protesting, just being. As if their presence was enough. And it was. Rhett didn't cross the park gates. He didn't step into that space. He just stood at the edge, watching the man whose mother he had dismissed. Watching the crowd that had gathered not for spectacle but for principle. He looked down at his hands. The same hands that had twisted the cane. The same hands that had reached out not to serve but to control. And for the first time, they felt small, unnecessary. Not because someone had shouted him down, but because someone had outweighed him in stillness. This wasn't fear. This wasn't the anxiety of losing a job or facing discipline. This was irrelevance. The realization that the authority he had leaned on for years meant nothing in the presence of true weight. He turned away, didn't run, didn't explain. He just walked back through a town that no longer bent around him. A town that didn't need his presence. A town where a woman had stood taller in silence than he ever had in uniform. As he disappeared around the corner, a mural on the opposite wall caught the breeze, painted fresh just that morning. It read, "Never underestimate the quiet ones. They remember everything." And Rhett knew he had been seen, but he would not be followed. The morning after the stillness, the town moved softer. People opened doors with gentler hands. Street conversations leaned toward reverence, not gossip. The bench beneath the oaks remained a landmark now, not marked by tape or plaque, but by presence. Even empty, it felt occupied by something unspoken. Shaq hadn't returned to Los Angeles, or Atlanta, or anywhere people assumed he'd fly off to once the silence served its purpose. He stayed, quietly, just a few blocks from where the park stretched into memory. No cameras, no alerts. Just family. Just stillness, rippling outward. But someone else had been working while the town was watching. His name was Hollis Reed, a woodworker. Third generation, hands thick as bricks but movements delicate as brushstrokes. He didn't make speeches, didn't show up in front pages, or lead marches. He lived above his shop on Locust Street, near the old train depot. People barely remembered his face until they needed something mended. An old table, a rocking chair, a creaking floorboard. And this time, he was the one who needed to mend something, far heavier than wood. Hollis had been in the park when it happened. Not close enough to stop it, but close enough to feel the snap in his chest when that cane broke. He knew who Lucille was before the video. He remembered her from back when she worked nights at the Baptist kitchen, serving chili and lemonade with a tired smile. He'd once fixed her front porch railing when no one else would. She paid him with banana bread and a prick. So when he saw that lion head crack under the hand of arrogance, he knew it wasn't just a cane that had been destroyed. It was a story, one that needed retelling. For 3 days, Hollis worked in silence. He locked the front of the shop and let sawdust settle like snowfall. He didn't use blueprints. He used memory, his own, and the one etched into the grain of that broken cane. Shaq had quietly delivered to him in a velvet pouch. The new one began with oak, Georgia white oak, cured for 3 years, solid rich, with rings that seemed to pulse under his fingertips. He shaped it by hand, carving each curve with care. The handle was forged from brass, then tipped in soft gold, and at the very top where the lion once roared, he embedded a new design. 2 hands, one large, one small, intertwined, palm to palm. But it was the words that mattered most. Burned into the shaft just above the grip were 5 words that had lived in the marrow of the town long before they were ever spoken aloud. Power walks in silence. When it was done, Hollis didn't wrap it, didn't box it. He oiled it, polished it, and placed it across his arms like something sacred. Then, without fanfare, he carried it down the street. Shaq was waiting in the park again. This time, Lucille sat beside him, upright, still without a cane, but not without strength. She wore lavender again, subtle, sure. The crowd had gathered again, though no one had invited them. There was no flyer, no live stream link, just whispers passed from porch to porch, from barber chairs to church pews. "They're going to the bench." Children stood on tiptoe. Elders leaned forward in folding chairs. Teenagers left their phones in pockets, eyes wide with the weight of something rare. Hollis stepped forward, the cane glinting in the sun like a truth too long buried. He didn't speak, just walked up to Shaq, nodded once, then placed the cane into his hands with the care of a man handing over legacy itself. Shaq rose. He didn't hold it up, didn't make it a symbol for show. He turned to Lucille, knelt not for drama but for honor, and offered it to her with both hands. Lucille looked at the cane, then at Shaq. Her hand trembled, just slightly, as she reached out and wrapped her fingers around the new grip. She tested its weight, let it settle beneath her, stood slowly, and with poise that defied time and pressure, she took a single step forward, then another, and another. No limp, no hesitation, only grace. The crowd didn't erupt. It hushed, as if afraid to disturb what had just unfolded. Eyes shimmered, hands pressed to hearts. No one clapped, not because they weren't moved, but because applause would have felt cheap next to what had just happened. Lucille walked across the path, the new cane tapping softly against the concrete like a heartbeat. She paused by the bench, placed her hand gently along its backrest, and nodded. Then she turned and walked back, upright, restored. A child near the front whispered, "Is she okay now?" And his grandfather said, "She was always okay." Now the world sees it. Shaq stood beside her, not towering, but steady. His hands remained by his sides. He didn't wave, he didn't smile, but his eyes, deep, quiet, filled with weight, spoke enough. Someone placed flowers near the bench. Others followed. Within minutes, the base of the oaks had become an altar. Not one of mourning, but of memory. A place that now held more than shade. It held redemption. As people began to leave, they did so in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The respectful kind. A silence that honored what had been broken and remade. Not in anger, but in craft, in community, and in care. Lucille held the cane like it had always belonged to her. Not as compensation, but as continuation. Hollis, back at the edge of the park, simply nodded and disappeared down the sidewalk. And the town, for the first time in a long time, felt balanced again. Not because justice had been shouted, but because dignity had walked. The video didn't erupt like wildfire. It seeped quietly, like water under a locked door. It began on neighborhood pages, passed along with cautious captions, a few shares, a few comments. But no outrage. Not yet. Just watching. Just wondering. Then it hit a national thread, paired with the photo of a woman walking beneath the oak's, cane in hand, head high, and that's when the current shifted. But it wasn't the cane that made people pause. It was the stillness, the silence in the footage, the restraint. A woman disrespected, but never reduced. A son who showed up not with sound, but with weight. A town that stood without shouting. The story began to trend, but not for the usual reasons. There were no clips of screaming matches, no footage of shoving lines or protests turned sour. Instead, people reposted the moment Lucille took her first step with the new cane. Others shared the mural that now stood near the park. Two hands clasped, carved into brick with the phrase, "Power walks in silence." Interviews were requested. None were given. Reporters arrived. Shaq declined. Lucille disappeared from view, not because she was avoiding the attention, but because she didn't need it. Her message had been delivered before the cameras even noticed. Editorials flooded in, some praising the quiet grace, others unpacking the history behind the woman. And the symbol. Journalists wrote about dignity as if it had just returned from war. Not many could describe what made the video powerful. Only that it made their chest tighten, and their eyes linger longer than expected. It didn't feel like a story. It felt like a lesson. And the one man who had refused to see it, finally did. Rhett Calloway resigned 3 days later. No press conference, no farewell speech, just a letter on a desk, and a locker emptied without ceremony. He didn't fight it, didn't spin it. There was no scandal to package, no redemption arc to cling to, just a man who had misused his authority in a town that decided not forget. He passed through the streets like a ghost. Some people glanced. Some didn't bother. A few nodded, but not out of respect, out of finality. He walked out the way he walked in. Unnoticed by some, unmissed by most. What lingered behind him wasn't anger. It was vacancy. Meanwhile, the town of Brookhaven, quiet, shaded, often overlooked, became a headline. Not because it burned, but because it stood. Teachers played the video in classrooms not to spark debate, but to inspire awareness. Civic groups discussed empathy through action, and murals continued to appear, not of Shaq dunking, not of trophies, but of Lucille, cane in hand, walking beneath oaks that now bowed a little lower in respect. One tweet went viral. The world didn't know who she was. But now, we all remember her silence. No movie deals. No book contracts. Just memory. Alive. Still moving. Shaq, true to form, said little publicly. A short post, one photo. His mother seated at the kitchen table. The new cane resting beside her. Captioned only with legacy protected. And that was enough. Because some stories don't need dramatizing. Some stories just need to exist. To unfold the way this one did. Not as a spectacle, but as a reflection. A confrontation with how easily people judge, and how slowly they learn who someone really is. In the end, the story didn't go viral, because of revenge. It wasn't a fire. It was a mirror, and people saw themselves in it. Their assumptions, their habits, their reflexes. And from that, they learned. They learned that sometimes power doesn't walk in boots. It walks in loafers. That strength isn't measured in volume, but in posture. That legacy doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it sits on a park bench waiting to be recognized. And most of all, they learned this. You never know who someone is. But now, you'll look twice. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Carry it. Share it in your next conversation. Question your first assumption. And remember the strength that walks without needing to shout. The quiet ones aren't invisible. They're unforgettable. Let this stay with you, not just as a moment, but as a mirror.